Hey y'all, welcome back to Legally Live. I'm your host, McKinley Malasa. Today we will be going over the Day 8 Part 1 recap of the State of Texas versus Kaitlin Armstrong trial. So let's go ahead and jump into it. Okay, so on Day 8, the morning started off with Stephen Aston still on the stand. And if you remember, he's the tool marking expert from APD. And he was on cross still, and Jeffrey Purrier was the defense attorney that was crossing him. And he says that he has never had another analyst disagree with his analysis, which is, again, sketch. And maybe that's because they work in the same lab right next to each other. It does appear that this is more of, and I think the defense actually brought that up, this is more of like peer analysis um, or peer review. And so he explains what would happen if they did. And I think he said that like a third person would have to come in and do an analysis and that the disagreement would be noted in the report. He also says that he misspoke the day before when he said that Spittler, the main detective, lead detective on the case, had asked him to eliminate Colin Strickland's gun, the Springfield. He says that because the defense had said, okay, so basically if you were already trying to eliminate his gun, then you had basically already reached your conclusion. You were just trying to prove your conclusion. And he says, no, that's not true. He misspoke. He went through the entire process. Uh, he says, oh, defense starts asking him about the class, subclass, and individual characteristics that experts look for to help identify weapons. And they then ask him to identify those characteristics on cartridge casings from this case that were shown on the Elmo. And he said he actually didn't find any specific subclass or individual characteristics on cartridge casing in question. That's super odd. So I thought you had to have individual characteristics in order to make a identification. So that's confusing. Um, then the defense suggests that because Aston isn't familiar with certain elements of how the gun is manufactured, maybe like hand tools, um, that he might not be able to ID those characteristics. And he agrees that it actually is a completely subjective process and that one person's standards may not be the same as his standards. Then Aston says that, yeah, okay, this is just the thing about the lab expert never disagreeing with him. On redirect, he says that the state wants him to explain how he went about excluding Colin Strickland's Springfield. And he says that he compared the known test fires from the Springfield to the crime scene bullets, and there was not sufficient agreement. But we were not shown the comparisons from the comparison microscope like we were for the ones on the 6 hour. Okay. The next witness that the state called was Bernadette DeRusi, and she was the medical examiner with the uh, Travis County, and she is an expert in forensic pathology. She performed the autopsy on Moriah Wilson the day after she died, and we went over a diagram and also the autopsy photos. There was a gunshot entrance wound on the right side of her face, like by her nose, and an exit wound on the left side of her jaw. There was bruising and bleeding around the left eye as a result of the gunshot. There was facial bone fragmentation, and there was also brain injuries. There's a gunshot entrance wound behind her right ear and a corresponding exit wound under the chin. So it looks like she got shot in the face. And as she was going down, got shot behind the ear because I think this one is like from above. And then she was on the ground apparently when she was shot from the left side of the chest. And the exit wound was on the left side of the back, I think. It was her heart. It was her heart. She had a gunshot wound to her hand and it was said that it appeared to be a defensive wound. She also had lower extremity injuries, including on her thigh. She had like a bruise and a scratch. Then there were the photos of Wilson's face with the injuries that we described above, and then Drusi was describing all of the wounds in each photo. She also said that there were projectile fragments which were recovered from Wilson's head, and she showed the photo of that. And those were actually the projectile fragments, those 5 fragments that we discussed with Aston, that were like too damaged to come up with an identification, or actually to even analyze, I think. Derusi is then pointing out the location and path of the wounds on the prosecutor's body, just like they did in the Murdoch case. If you remember that dude getting up there with like the wooden dowel and showing the jury on, I think it was Waters, where the wounds were, right? So then on cross-examination, they ask about characteristics and compounds found when someone is shot. She testifies that the range of fire was indeterminate. Wait, I guess that means distant. And that there is nothing inconsistent with the shot being from a distance. I don't know why it says that. Okay. So yeah, so it could have been from quite a distance, I guess. The next witness on the stand was Officer Johnson with the Travis County Sheriff's Office. She transported Armstrong to her doctor's appointment on October 11th, 2023. And if you will recall, that is the day of the famous escape. If you haven't seen the video, Google it. It is hilarious. I mean, it's only hilarious because she was caught, but it is hilarious. You see her running with like her hands clearly in cuffs and her trying to jump the fence. And I actually always thought that she did jump the fence, but apparently she didn't. We're about to find out. But anyway, Johnson testifies that she patted Armstrong down from head to toe and then placed her in a belly chain around her waist, which attaches to the handcuffs. And then she was about to put the leg irons on, but Kaitlin handed her a doctor's note that instructed her that leg irons were not to be used that day. There were 2 officers inside the vehicle, and Johnson was sitting next to Kaitlin. As they were exiting the building, so after the doctor's appointment, Johnson was leading Kaitlin, and her partner was behind Kaitlin. Kaitlin was in the middle, and Johnson went ahead and opened the door for all of them and then let them exit. At the same time, she said that a nurse was approaching them to say that they had forgotten some paperwork. And as she was grabbing the paperwork, her partner yelled out that Kaitlin was escaping. And so Johnson says she immediately left the nurse and started to pursue, but that Kaitlin had evaded all custody. So then we're shown a video from inside a police car showing the escape. And Kaitlin is much taller than Johnson and has a far superior, this is one you can see on the internet, far superior athletic abilities. She has a much greater and more athletic stride than Officer Johnson. Officer Johnson stumbles while trying to climb up an embankment, and Kaitlin jumps trying to climb up the fence, right? And then that was where the video ended. And so I always assumed she got over the fence because I knew she had gotten like pretty far away, right? But apparently not. Then shown a different video of Kaitlin, that Kaitlin did not get over the fence, that she turns around to run. Johnson trips again, and Kaitlin has freed herself from her cuffs, which Johnson says that she did secure right before they left. So that's interesting. Kaitlin then takes off in the opposite direction, and she was captured about a half mile away in a driveway. Johnson testified that she was calm, not winded, and composed. And this is super creepy. She was apprehended at 311 Wilson Street, which is creepy because Wilson is Mo's last name, right? She said that her partner kept yelling, "Stop, please don't make this harder on yourself." And that when she was captured, she was put back in restraints, and Johnson put her back in back into the back of one of the backup APD cars that had arrived on scene. She did not say anything to Johnson when she was captured, and then Johnson is not the one that took her back to the jail. Her supervisor instead transported her back to the hospital. Johnson also pointed out on a map the direction that Armstrong went, and it was like an overhead map of the medical facility and the surrounding area. Cross of Johnson. Armstrong was then taken to the hospital, and Johnson says the doctor's appointment was for a shoulder injury. The defense suggests that it may have been due to being kicked by an inmate or an officer. I'm not sure which one was said, but regardless, Johnson says that she has no info to indicate any abuse or mistreatment at the jail. She says that Kaitlin was cooperative about returning to custody upon capture. I mean, what could she do, though? What could she do at that point? Johnson acknowledges that Armstrong did have a doctor's note allowing her not to have the leg restraints that day, and that the note was not forged, and that it was indeed from the jail doctor. On redirect, the state asks, "Did you look at the note?" She says yes, and they say, "Did it give her permission to escape or run from you?" And Johnson says no. The questions in this case. Next, the state calls Alejandra Gill, and she is a forensic DNA scientist with DPS. She introduces, and it is admitted, a Texas DPS lab biology report, and this one shows 8 submissions that were examined. The first one was a swab from the handlebars of Mo's bike. The second one were swabs from the seat of the bicycle. Next were swabs of firearm grip, trigger guard, safety, magazine release, and slide. And those were apparently all on one swab, which is crazy. There was also a swab of the magazine base and loading port, and a known saliva standard from Kaitlin Armstrong, and a known blood standard from Mo Wilson. There was also a swab of the underside of the bicycle seat, as well as the exterior of the gum wrapper. The next DPS lab biology report that is introduced and admitted into evidence shows 2 submissions, one being a known saliva standard from Colin Strickland, and the other a known saliva standard from Caitlin Cash. The next biology report, also admitted into evidence, shows 3 submissions. This time, one was a swab of the stain on the floor in the bathroom, so something that appeared to be blood. The next one was the swab of the stain on the cinder block, which had appeared to be blood, but if you recall, it turned out to be paint. The third one was a swab of the blood on the left thigh of Mo Wilson. This is the one that Spittler had come up with the crazy theory that it was like it was somebody else's blood because they had injured themselves while shooting Mo because of the way that it had dripped down her leg in a straight line. But we've seen that before, where it can like start to drip off of your arms or your face down your neck, and it can actually just drip in a straight line. But in this case, I think she also had an injury to her finger, her index finger, and that is maybe where it came from. I mean, I'm not an expert, so I shouldn't say it. But anyway, Gill was only responsible for packaging the DNA and packaging up all the swabs. She did not perform an analysis. No further work was done by her on the case. So then cross of Gill, she says that the evidence came from APD. She can't vouch for the collection or handling prior to receiving it. She can't speak to possible contamination. Then she goes on to be questioned about shedding DNA, and she says that's when you touch an item and leave behind your DNA, and that some people leave more than others depending on your rate that you shed your skin. Transfer DNA is possible, she said, and that's where it starts in one place and ends up where a person has never been. So it starts off on a person, place, or thing. It starts off in one place, ends up on a person, place, or thing where the person whose DNA it is has never been, right? And they're asking about this because they obviously want to show that this is transferred DNA on the handlebar and the seat. Or was it just the handlebars? The handlebars. And uh, I don't know that. Yeah. Anyway, that's what they want to show. So she acknowledges that DNA evidence does not indicate how, where, or when it was deposited. And she tested for the presence of blood. The only samples that came back positive for blood were the one on the floor underneath Moriah Wilson and the one on Moriah Wilson's leg. And it was unclear to Gill whose blood it was. The only standards that she was given to test were Armstrong's, Strickland's, Cash's, and Wilson's. And these subjects were decided by APD. She does have the ability to test DNA to anyone that APD provides her, but these were the only subjects that APD delivered to her. She only did the sample preparation. She did not interpret the data. The interpretation was done by Samantha Perkins. Perkins is here today, and you guessed it, Samantha Perkins is the next witness. So Samantha Perkins is the DNA supervisor for DPS, and she's responsible for the DNA operations at the lab. She performed comparisons on Kaitlin Armstrong, Colin Strickland, Mo Wilson, and Caitlin Cash. She says that DNA profiles are never 100% match, and the highest likelihood language is very strong support. The first submission was swabs from the handlebars, and the DNA profile came back with 3 contributor matches. One was Mo Wilson, one was Kaitlin Armstrong, and one was an unrelated individual. That's weird. I remember earlier in a different video, I had said like, oh, well, if this was transfer DNA, wouldn't we have had an unrelated individual that was present on the bicycle? And I didn't hear anything about that. And then it turns out, oh, wait, but there is an unrelated individual. So, I mean, that's what I've always heard when there's like a mixture of, um, when there's a mixture like this, especially if she really did wash her bicycle after she came in from her ride that day. Like, I believe Caitlin Cash came back to the stand and testified for the state that she had indeed washed it that day, right? So that's weird. And I know that the state also said at some point that like this couldn't have been transferred because Mo had gone swimming, but Mo did go swimming, but then she got back on the bicycle and put the helmet back on, both places, and things that Caitlin had touched, right? So I don't know, maybe. Caitlin is considered a possible contributor to the profile. It says there's strong support that Caitlin's DNA is a match on the bike handlebars. Colin Strickland and Caitlin Cash were excluded. The second submission was the swabs from the seat of the bike. There's a mixture of 3 individuals on this one, again, including Mo Wilson, also 2 unrelated individuals, 1 unknown contributor, and Kaitlin Armstrong is a possible contributor. There's very strong support, and there's very strong support that it is Armstrong's DNA. Again, Colin Strickland and Caitlin Cash were excluded. The third submission was the swabs from the firearm grip, and this was it's from the firearm, right? The 6-hour. It was the grip, the trigger guard, the safety, the magazine, the release, and the slide serrations. Again, 1 swab apparently for all of that. The DNA profile could match 3 individuals: Caitlin Armstrong, Colin Strickland, and an unknown unrelated individual. In this one, Caitlin Cash and Mo Wilson are both excluded. Above were the only places where interpretable DNA profiles were obtained. She further testified that no DNA was found on the magazine base of the gun or on the gum wrapper. Remember the gum wrapper that was the mystery gum wrapper found in Caitlin Cash's apartment after the crime? Only Wilson's DNA was found on a stain on the floor and also on her leg, right? Then on cross of Perkins, she again says that DNA does not tell when or how it got there. The only swabs that were taken. So swabs were only taken from the Sig Sauer, but not from the Springfield handgun, which again, I think is weird. I think that's very weird. The unknown DNA on the handgun and bike, they bring that up again. And then there was also unknown DNA on the handgun, along with Colin Strickland and Kaitlin Armstrong's. Now, get this. The unknown on the gun had a Y chromosome, indicating that it was male DNA that was on the gun. And then she testifies that it's the same swab, so they can't determine where on the gun the DNA came from. And the unknown DNA on bike with Caitlin's and Mo's, they just wanted to point that out again. And they also said that there was no DNA collected from the Jeep. Why? I don't know. And then she says transfer DNA can end up on one person, place, or thing where that person, place, or thing has not been, and be transferred again and again. Then on cross, though, she also said that like 4 transfers would be a lot, and that this case would indicate 4 transfers. And they on redirect, they were also pointing out the fact about Mo having gone swimming and then gone to eat and everything, and like that the swimming would have washed off the DNA, but not really, because she got back on the motorcycle before she went home. She also put the helmet back on before she went home. And we know this because Colin testified that at the end of the ride, before he said bye to her, that she got her things that he had, I guess, in like his pouch or his seat or something on his motorcycle, and also gave back his helmet. On redirect, the state asked Perkins they just wanted to clear this up, that DNA can also end up where a person has been. Like, duh. Not even sure that anybody needed to hear that. Not even sure. Anyway, so that was the end of my part 1 video on day 8. And the reason that I am splitting it up is because the information for part 2 is going to be, it was a presentation, and it was pretty lengthy, pretty detailed. And so I just want to make sure that we're already, pretty far here. And I want to make sure that we don't go crazy long on this. So anyway, I will see you back in part 2. Go ahead and like and subscribe and share and comment, do all the things. And check down in the description. I have some related content. So other content creators that have produced content on this case, and they also have some live streams where I have appeared discussing this case. So go check those out. One of them that is super helpful is the one that was on day, I don't remember what day it is. I think it's day 7, but it was on Making Law Simple and Valhalla Awaits. And it was with Ian Runkle and Stephen Gosney going over the ballistics portion of this testimony. So the expert that was on the stand at the very beginning of this day was Stephen Aston, and he was the tool marking expert. And he's all of his testimony was the stuff that we were discussing with Ian and Stephen, and they are like experts on firearms. So go check that stream out. They provided a lot of helpful information. And I think somebody even brought up the expert that we will see in our video for day 9, which is coming soon. All right. Thanks, guys. See you in part 2. Bye.